I have had many conversations with people who either avoid practicing yoga or exercising even in different ways. Yoga is often one of the bigger ways. I'll explain why in a moment. So I've had many conversations with people who either avoid that or feel like they're doing it wrong, because sometimes it can bring up emotions. So I want to speak to that today because it's a really important thing to be aware of, but also to address and to have an understanding around of what that means and what's going on. But first and foremost, that there's nothing wrong with you if you do experience emotions, whether you practice yoga or whether exercising. Sometimes even cardio, metcon kind of exercise, can bring up emotions because you're getting out of breath, and what that does is the breath and breathing can shift some of the little blocks that we've carefully placed in order to avoid feeling something or experiencing or processing something. So I cannot tell you the number of times I have gotten teary, that I have felt like crying or cried to an extent while on the mat. There was a period of time, and it was still when I was working in corporate as an employee, that I was experiencing a lot of anxiety. So I was doing a lot of restorative yoga, which I would highly recommend all the time. However, there was a period of time where most restorative practices I was doing, I would end up not crying, but just teary. There would be tears. And while there's a catharsis to it, sometimes it can take you by surprise, or sometimes you can feel like you're doing it wrong. And why do I feel this way when I'm doing yoga? And yoga is meant to make you feel good, right? And then there's a lot of people that will tell me that they avoid doing yoga because it makes them feel bad. And I use the word bad loosely. I use it as a generalization because often that's how it's presented to me as, is rather than looking deeper at what those actual feelings are, it can just be, well, I feel bad because I don't feel good, because I don't feel happy. And the pursuit of happiness is not a healthy pursuit, because we're not meant to be happy all the time either. We're allowed to experience, we're human, so we're allowed to experience emotions that are not happy or joy all the time. They are great emotions to experience. I think joy and contentment is a better ones than happiness itself. But I digress. But if you are someone who's avoiding practicing yoga, I'll speak to yoga, but I know that even for me, it's shown up when I've done other exercises like cardio or even weights. But it's a really, again, it's a really cathartic thing because I can check in with what's going on. But I'll speak to yoga because often that's where people avoid it, because what happens is when we practice yoga in itself, we are slowing down. And when we're used to being on the go and going and doing, because that's what we maybe have told ourselves that we should be doing, or that's what maybe we have been told or conditioned to believe that that's what we should be doing, it can feel confronting as hell. And I still experience that myself. I still have moments where I know that I probably need that space that yoga gives me. That's what drew me to yoga. Not necessarily, well, definitely the stretching, but it was the space. And I can feel that I need that space, but I can also feel that there's something waiting there for me in that space. But I wanted to address this because I hate the idea of people avoiding something that might feel really useful for them. And again, yoga is not a catch-all. It is not a solve-all. Nothing is. I've spoken to that before as well. But if we're avoiding something that might feel really useful, what we're avoiding in that sense might be slowing down to process something that is there, that is underlying. And when we step into avoidance in any way is when we really need to look at something. Avoidance isn't healthy in any sense. Sometimes there are times where you just kind of need to get on with shit and get on with getting on and do things. You need to still function. So I've had moments where I have had that as well. It's like I'm aware of something underlying and processing. So that is there. So I can almost give it space to go, okay, at a deeper level, you process. I'm going to come back to you and keep checking in, and I'm allowing you to do that. But at the same time, I'm also just going to get on with stuff because I need to, and I need to function right now, and it's a little too much. But that's a conscious, almost self-conversation that I have there. It's a conscious awareness of this is what's happening. I'm not dismissing this. I'm not pushing it away and saying it's wrong. I'm just identifying that it's a little too much for me to address all at once right now. So I'm going to address it in bite-sized pieces. And in the meantime, I'm going to remain functional because I need to. But again, it's a consciousness. It's a conscious approach. But if you are avoiding yoga because it makes you feel something, consider that your body is already experiencing that, even if you're not consciously or cognitively acknowledging it. So our bodies will experience stress. Even if we don't think we're feeling stress, our bodies are still in that sometimes. And that's all kinds of stress. Sometimes it's the stress that's necessary for us to get up and go in our day. Sometimes it's that underlying stress that is just simmering there. And our bodies are experiencing that. Our adrenals are likely pumping when we experience that. Even if we say we feel fine, if we're in a heightened situation for ongoing enough, we can be handling that in a really good way and, being able to function really well. But we need to not dismiss the fact that our bodies are probably experiencing that stress in the same way that bodies experience stress, even if our minds, even if our awareness is, oh, but I'm handling it okay. It doesn't mean that you're handling it badly. It just means that we still need to be aware of the fact that our bodies are still experiencing that. So we need to give space for our bodies to rest and recover. And at some point, it's important to give enough space, even if it's bite-sized pieces, even if it feels emotional, if that's what's coming up, even if it feels something, we need to still allow space at points in time, at some points along the way, even when we're feeling good mentally, to allow our bodies to process it, because our bodies will be holding that stress because of the chemicals that are released in our bodies when we are under stress or are under the pump or are under pressure or dealing with changes. Even if we embrace changes, I'm someone that tends to embrace change quite well generally. Few caveats there, but generally. However, I still need to allow space for my body to process that without it becoming drained or worn out or fatigued, because then it steps into adrenal fatigue territory, and we don't want that either. So consider that your body still needs to process, and if you feel emotions, and that's why you're avoiding something like yoga or other self-inquiry exercises, it's not all about yoga. If you're avoiding it because it makes you feel something, consider that that's an indication that there is something there that needs to be processed. So whether it's yoga or a different method or something else entirely, allow yourself to find a way to process it, even if it's in smaller pieces, because otherwise you're still going to experience that on a body level, and then it's probably going to hit you a bit like a Mack truck later on down the track when it's really not useful for it to. And know that it is completely normal to experience those things as well during your practice or otherwise, and that is part of being human, and we are all human, and we need to remind ourselves of that sometimes.